the first comprehensive study of the Union invasion of Giles County in 1862. It is by Al McLean. He is a native of Giles County. He's now an attorney in Roanoke, graduate of Hampton, Sydney, and the University of Richmond Law School. And so it's my pleasure to present Al McLean.
They wanted me to stand up here, so I kind of feel like the king of the world or something, but I grew up here in Giles County, and I can say one thing: it's a good thing they didn't test kids on local history, because I'd have certainly flunked out. One of the questions could have been give the names and the ranks of the future presidents who fought in the Battle of Giles County. And on that one, I'd have probably made a 50, because I'd have gone back to the county literature, and I would have said Colonel Rutherford B. Hayes, Major William McKinley, and Lieutenant James Garfield. Well, it was Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, which is not a big deal. It was Commissary Sergeant William McKinley. And poor James Garfield, they have demoted him. It was General Garfield, who was fighting in Mississippi at the time. And I don't have the slightest idea how he ever got into the Battle of Pearisburg. So we only have 2 presidents, not 3. Another thing I would have certainly flunked on would have been if they'd said the Battle of Pearisburg was fought only in Pearisburg. It wasn't. It was fought over about 5 miles of the county. It was more of a running rear guard action. And the Confederate commander would write that the heaviest fighting of the entire war was at the Narrows. So anyway, let's go to the map here. I'm going to start up here. This is it was called Raleigh Courthouse. We now know of it as Beckley. I certainly don't have the time to go into it. By a bunch of Confederate incompetency and bungling, the Union troops spent the winter of 1861 and 1862 that far down into what's now West Virginia. If you go on down, you'll see Flat Top Mountain, you'll see Princeton, you'll see the Narrows, Pearisburg, or Giles Courthouse, as a lot of people called it back then, a place called Shannon's. This is going to be an important place for the Confederates. This is where all the Confederate troops gathered. It was a home of Thomas Shannon, and it's right at the intersection of Route 42 that goes to Bland and Route 100. On past is Cloyd's Mountain, and here is the railroad. It crosses at a place called Central Depot. We know of as Radford now. But anyway, here's the Dublin Depot, which had been the first one out. Now, you can't understand anything about the war in Southwest Virginia if you don't understand this railroad. It was called the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad. It was always vital during the war. Every action by the North was to cut off this railroad. It served the salt mines, not the salt mines, but the salt works at Saltville. They provided about 2/3 of the salt for the Confederacy. Back then, salt was even more important because you had to salt meat to preserve it. But right now, it is running full steam from near Richmond to Alabama, and it's a vital target for the North. They're trying to cut it off. Okay, one of the places, if you want to go to the next one there, here is, you know this place, the Narrows. This picture is about 1930-something. You can see the town in the background. The town of Narrows did not exist at that time. Anybody can look at that and say, that's a heck of a military place. In other words, it doesn't take a whole lot of soldiers to stop another army. This is very vital. Robert E. Lee, and it's early in the war, he's not commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. He is a military advisor to Jefferson Davis. He is very aware of the importance of the Narrows, and he talks to, and here's the next guy, if you want to go to the next slide. This man, this is Henry Heth, I keep calling him Heath, but it's Heth. And he is the overall commander of the Southwest Virginia area. And Lee is communicating to Heth and talking about, what are we going to do? Anybody can look at a map knows that the North is going to be coming down from Beckley to the railroad. Well, there's not much General Lee can do for this General Heath. He had Stonewall Jackson sitting in the Valley of Virginia with just a few thousand troops. He's facing 3 armies totaling 60,000 men. George McClellan is coming straight up the peninsula between York and James River with this massive army headed right to Richmond. Things look bleak for the Confederates. So this gentleman's going to have to gather up as best he can some troops. Now, this man is a very interesting character. He's a Virginia aristocrat. The people out here didn't like him. He went to West Point. He was fought in the Mexican War, fought in the Indian Wars. He was a favorite of Robert E. Lee. He was the only general supposedly that Lee called by his nickname Harry. He was a handsome, aristocratic bungler. He had a number of battles that he bungled up. Now, a year later, now this one wasn't his fault. It was his division that accidentally ran into the Union Army at a little village called Gettysburg. But, you know, he is trying to desperately cobble together this Confederate army. And what he does is he pulls a regiment from Lewisburg, the 22nd Virginia, that's commanded by a man named George S. Patton. And you probably heard that name before, but with a different war. This is the World War II general's grandfather. There's another regiment in the general area of Pearisburg and Princeton are troops under Walter Jennifer and William Peters. And then coming in from out in Southwest Virginia is the 36th Virginia Regiment under the command of John McCausland. This group really represents the one advantage that the South had over the North at the beginning of the Civil War, and it was a well-trained officer corps. Heath went to West Point, Jennifer went to West Point, Patton went to Virginia Military Institute, and then McCausland, he went to Virginia Military Institute. He did some graduate work. He came back to teach. Artillery is going to play a big part of this battle, and he taught artillery. He was assistant instruction under one Thomas, later to be Stonewall Jackson. The Federals are led by a gentleman who was totally untrained in military. He was a lawyer a year before. The second in command had no military experience, and he had been a journalist the year before. Now, if we can go to the next slide, here is the commander, right there, of the Union forces in Pearisburg. This is Rutherford B. Hayes. He was a colonel. He was a lieutenant colonel, and he would be commanding the troops. Next to him is Dr. Webb, who was his brother-in-law, and I'm going to come to him in a minute about something that's been discovered since my book was written. But anyway, Hayes is just like a historian's dream. He is the reason that I could write a book on this little battle as opposed to a short newspaper article. He's very articulate. He went to Kenyon College, and then he went to Harvard Law School. He writes in a diary all the time. He writes letters profusely. His stuff is really good stuff to read. He's the first president with a presidential library. And he was, to him, the high point of his life was fighting in the war, not being president. And he was always gathering stuff from his troops. So there's a really great amount of stuff on such a small incident. Okay, now, Hayes, that was a young man who was 18 years old in 1861, joined the Union Army as a private, if you want to go to the next slide. And again, both of these photos aren't the best, but they're ones closest to the time of the battle. All right. Hayes, a few weeks before the battle, had seen some potential in this young man and had promoted him to commissary sergeant. This is future President William McKinley. Now, McKinley and Hayes and the regiment that came to Pearisburg was the 23rd Ohio Volunteer Regiment. They were absolutely, positively, no questions asked, the most remarkable regiment to fight in the Civil War. They did real well in the Civil War. They had a good war record. A regiment is led by a colonel, but 6 of their members went on to become generals. Well, anyway, Hayes was always fighting with his immediate commander, a fellow named Eliakim Scammon. They were militarily opposites as much as there could be. Scammon was very much sort of like George McClellan, spit and polish, do a good dress parade, don't hurt yourself, don't get anybody shot or anything like that. Hayes was very aggressive, and he was, in my mind, a remarkable military leader. Hayes is at Raleigh Courthouse. Okay, he would be the lead regiment on any attack south. There are 2 attacks coming out of West Virginia. One is a little bit further north, going east to the town of Stanton in the Shenandoah Valley. They are under Union General Milroy. Hayes is coming down this way. He has gotten down to this area, Flat Top Mountain, and he sends out a company to see if they can capture this guerrilla leader who's out in that area, Southern guerrilla leader. Well, the Confederates try and change things on them. They end up surrounding them. They have this company trapped at a place called Clark's Hollow. They bring in regular troops from Princeton, and it looks real bad for the company. But Hayes can hear the shooting, the firing 6 miles away, and he puts his men on a forced march, and they come and chase them. Now they outnumber the Confederates. They chase them away. But Hayes is not the kind of leader who would be just content to say, we chased the Yankees away. He goes after them. He marches his men. He's already marched them 6 miles on forced march, and in 13 hours he marches them a number 22 miles through really rough territory, crossing the Bluestone River, whatever, chasing the Confederates. Well, when they came over the hill to Princeton, what they saw just stunned them. Now remember, this is the South. This is Princeton, Virginia. The Southern commander, Colonel Jennifer, and nobody can figure this out, he decided that not only would he abandon the town, he would also burn it to the ground. Every house was set on fire. The place, when the Yankees got there, was literally, the whole town was burning down. It's very hard to figure out what he had in mind. You could say, well, he didn't want to have them a nice place to stay. And one Union soldier wrote in his diary, didn't they know we had tents, but anyway, he burns the town down. Now, Hayes is in Princeton, and he's starting to get intelligence. And he's getting intelligence from a source that I don't think has ever been properly given credit for in the Civil War history, and it's a group called contrabands. And what contrabands are escaped slaves. I put in a section in the book about the contrabands, and also I even expanded it, going into about a black slave who hid out escaped Union soldiers over in Eggleston. They'd escaped from Danville, and they were trying to head up into the mountains. Well, anyway, Hayes is hearing from the contrabands that the Narrows, that great defensive area, is wide open, that they have abandoned that. Jennifer not only abandoned and burned Princeton, but he abandoned what is this tremendous defensive position. But Hayes is going crazy because he's writing his commander all the time, who's up near Beckley still, saying, I want to go, I got to go, it's wide open, and the guy won't let him go. So finally, on May 6th, he just throws up his hands and he goes anyway, without permission. There is no place where he was given permission to go into Giles County. But he went in anyway, and what he did was he sent a group of about 250 soldiers into Giles County. They were under his second in command, Major Cumley. Cumley just walks through the Narrows. It's the only time during the war that Union troops will make it through the Narrows. He walks through the Narrows and he goes up to Giles Courthouse. There they capture a few militiamen and a few Confederate soldiers who were trying to get a large cache of supplies out of Pearisburg. They were being stored at the Presbyterian Church. Well, so they end up in Pearisburg, and something else happens to them that day. Heth is down here. Heath is down here. I keep calling him Heth. Heath is down here. He's gathering troops. He's got a lot more troops than Major Cumley has in Pearisburg. He's got probably close to 2,000 troops. Cumley's up here with 250 troops, but he doesn't attack, and I think the reason is, and there are two sources, and it goes back to the blacks. Either, depending on the source you read, a group of blacks or one black man hiked down from Pearisburg and told the Confederate, "Oh Lord, there are 10 to 15,000 troops in Pearisburg." You know, and they're just, you know, and now I don't have anything from the southern side. The southern records aren't nearly as good as to what, you know, whether that caused him to stall or not. But anyway, he doesn't attack for the 3 days because I think he's worried about what kind of army's up there. He and Lee, when they discussed this whole thing, said they're bound to bring in, you know, do it the right way and bring in a consolidated group of 4,000 to 6,000, and then all of a sudden he gets this report of 10 to 15. But anyway, the next day Hayes goes into the town. There's the Woodrum Hotel. This is where Hayes is supposed to have stayed in Pearisburg. It would be located across where the old theater building is on Main Street. Now, there are all kinds of different rumors about this. Like I say, it was early in the war. You're the conquering soldier. You're into enemy territory. You're going to pay your hotel bill. You know, I think that ended pretty soon. Okay, I don't think General Sherman paid many hotel bills. But anyway, Hayes, they had to retreat so quickly. At least I found one officer talking about, we had to leave so fast they didn't have time to pay my bill. Supposedly you have different rumors about it, but there is one tradition that Hayes later sent the money to Ms. Woodrum for his stay in the hotel. And there is also a tradition, although we couldn't find it, that she wrote a letter to one of the New York newspapers saying what a nice gentleman he was, and he sent me the money later after he had to leave town. So this is the Woodrum Hotel. Let's go to the next shot there. You all know this one. This is a much older picture of Dr. Johnson's office. Okay, that is supposed to be, it's just oral tradition, there's nothing written down, have been Hayes' headquarters. It would have made sense. At that time, this place was located across the street from the Presbyterian Church, where there was all these stores that, you know, commissary supplies that were left behind. Then you can go on to the next one there. You all know that house. That's the Johnson home, Dr. Johnson's home, part of the museum. Okay, and let's go on to the next one. Here's the courthouse. Now you can see actually better on the front of the book. See how the cupola is all boarded up, and the thing they have a weather vane with bullet holes in it over at the museum. People say it was from the battle. Everything came through here so fast, I'm inclined to think that it was Union soldiers taking shots at the weather vane, and down here was the ones who weren't very accurate. But anyway, you know, when they found all these supplies, it was the bonanza. There's several long inventories. You could have supported several brigades instead of regiments with the supplies that were at the Presbyterian Church. One Union soldier said it was the best picnic of the war. That, you know, you had these long lists. I also noted that two Union privates added to the list a large quantity of whiskey. But anyway, another one, and he used a term that I just love when he described the stay in Pearisburg. And he said, they were living on the top shelf. But anyway, you know, I've often had a question about how do the people from Pearisburg react to these guys. You have this little town of 380 people with 600 enemy soldiers suddenly in town. And I would say one thing about the people of Giles, I think they were a little naive going back to that it's early in the war. Because, well, let's get to the next picture here. They still believed in Confederate money. The Union soldiers thought this was the craziest thing in the world. Every bank could issue money. They could just print money. This one, and this is the one that breaks my heart, because I didn't know about this until after I'd written the book and published the book. But if you can see up there, Dominion Bank, cash in the branch bank in Pearisburg, $1. Okay, this one down here was sent from Western Virginia by Dr. Joseph Webb. That's Hayes's brother-in-law. He sent it as some friend, we don't know who, as a souvenir. And that's in private hands now, this bill. But anyway, they got into these bills, and I think the term that one of them used was our penmen did a real good job of signing these bills, And so, they had all this money, and the Confederates would take it. One describes, I took some of this worthless paper, bought a chicken, and got change in return, silver in return. But anyway, they did that. Now, another thing that I think shows that people may have been a little naive, it wasn't yet times when you had expressions like loose lips sink ships. I talked about how good the contrabands were as a source of intelligence. Well, another source of intelligence in Pearisburg was for Hayes to send his men out, and it was a so polite society. They went out and had dinner with the locals. and one time, 2 of his officers came back and named every number of every regiment, a Confederate regiment, that was gathering outside. I mean, I can see some lady thinking she's going to scare this poor Union soldier to death, and he's sitting there desperately just trying to memorize all those numbers of all those regiments she was saying were out there. And it was real good. They named every regiment that was out there. But anyway, let's go on to the next one. This is the regimental band. They led the troops into town as they marched in with Colonel Hayes. One soldier wrote, the band would pay for the people, and when they would play Dixie, the windows would open and they would wave kerchiefs and aprons out the window for the song. Now this band has a very remarkable career. Hayes comes back when George Crook comes and fights the Battle of Clords Mountain 2 years later, and when he burns the bridge. And as this 700-foot bridge is engulfed in flames, there's the band playing music on top of a hill there. I guess they had to have a little accompaniment as they burned the bridge down. Well, Hayes is going berserk because he has cashed in. He's hit the jackpot. He's taken this big defensive position, the Narrows. He's taken the town. He's taken all these supplies. He's made it. And yet, he knows that there's a large Confederate group gathering outside of town. What he needs is reinforcements. And he's desperately contacting Colonel Scammon, sending him message after message saying, send reinforcements, send artillery. We have no artillery. They have artillery. We've captured all this stuff, and nothing's coming. Well, for once, it wasn't Scammon's fault. History does not occur in a vacuum. And the battle that most affected Pearisburg was Stonewall Jackson's Valley Campaign. Jackson began his Valley Campaign about this time. Now remember I said that General Milroy was headed east towards Stanton. And Jackson wanted to fight in the valley. And he couldn't have this Union Army in his rear, so one of the first things he did was on June 8th, he attacked the Union forces at a little town called McDowell. And that was just 2 days before the Battle of Pearisburg. What happened was the overall commander, when the Union forces were defeated, the overall commander panicked. That would be John C. Fremont. The overall commander in West Virginia. He panics and he freezes all the troops in position. Instead of consolidating together, he orders everybody to stay where you are. Don't move. Well, Hayes, Scammon wants to reinforce Hayes, but he can't because he's been ordered to stay. Scammon at that time was in the town of Princeton, to stay in Princeton. So, General Heath is out there about 11 miles away, and he's finally figured that there aren't 10 to 15,000 troops out there. And so you had this 3-day gap where if the Union soldiers had reinforced because of what the blacks did, possibly what the blacks did, they would have had a fair fight, regular sized fight, or even defeated the Confederates. So, but you got Hayes here with 600 soldiers, no artillery, and they're seeing, the Federals report seeing Confederate scouts with binoculars out and what have you. Well, finally, Heath decides to act, and he starts at 10 o'clock at night. And he does what, for that early in the Civil War, is a real remarkable thing to do, especially with a whole lot of new recruits, and he does a night march. They leave at 10 o'clock at night. You want to show the next This is, down here is Shannon's, and up here is Pearisburg. They march at night through some, what can be some real rough territory. And they come out and they meet the Confederates. They aren't able to surprise them because Hayes knew what was coming. And he'd set out sentries several miles out from town who start shooting at them before dawn. Hayes has enough time to get his men together and form a battle line. Now, there's a lot of debate about where exactly that occurred. And that, I think, using the different testimonies of the different soldiers, it occurred on that ridge coming down from Angel's Rest, right where Henson Avenue comes in, right as you come into town. It's the only logical place to even set up. One, it was close to town where you had your soldiers. If the Confederates are attacking, you can't go marching 5 miles to your battle line. Also, it gave them what's called an open field of fire. By the way, this is what's called the Gilmer map, and there's a copy of it at the History Society. You see Angel's Rest, what have you. This was made in 1864. The maps of this area were absolutely awful. They were just squiggly lines, and a guy named Gilmer, who was the chief engineer, made a number of topographical maps. And this is a very good and very accurate map, which, as you notice up here, they misspelled Pearisburg, but I'll never be one to criticize somebody for misspelling stuff. Okay, so Hayes has lined up his men, and here come the Confederate troops. And they line up. In the book is a map that is believed to have been hand-drawn by Rutherford B. Hayes. They line up. And of course, he's got at least 2,000 men. We know, we get an accurate count on the Federals at 600. We're not sure how many Confederates are out there, so I use the conservative 2,000 men and 5 pieces of artillery. The Confederates let go with a couple shots of artillery, and Hayes is wounded. He shot, a piece of shrapnel cuts him across the knee. Now here's your trivia pursuit question. A lot of presidents have used their military experience as a springboard to the presidency, but how many of them were actually wounded in combat? And the answer is only 2. James Monroe was wounded in Princeton in the Revolutionary War, and Hayes was wounded 4 times during the Civil War. Now he will meet General Heath several years later at the White House. Heath is his guest, and they're sitting there on an almost comical meeting talking about the battle. But Hayes, who suffered some really severe wounds, said that that wound has haunted me more than any other wound. It's hurt me the most. And I think what happened was he just thought he was, cut, but it probably cut some tendons or whatever in his knee that caused some real permanent damage. Once he tried to get off his horse, he just collapsed on that knee. But anyway, Hayes is a politician, and anybody that gets elected president is a good politician, and all good politicians know how to count. And it didn't take Hayes very long to figure out it was time to leave the little town of Pearisburg. In his map, the battle line, the Confederate line, is more than 2 times longer than the Union one. And all they'd had to do was swing around and do what they call a flanking movement. They could have captured the whole regiment. Gosh knows how many they could have killed or whatever. So Hayes knows it's time to get out of town. Well, you want to go to the next one? This battle and this retreat literally goes through Main Street of Pearisburg. This is one shot of Main Street. Here's the Woodrum Hotel. This is about, I'd say 1890 or something like that. You can see further down, see that steeple? That's the Presbyterian Church. It's not the one that was there during the Civil War. The Johnson home would have been across from that, and then the courthouse would have been down closer on the street there. So his group comes running through Pearisburg. Now, they don't have the capacity, they don't have enough wagons or anything to take with them the Confederate supplies that they captured. So, what are you going to do if you can't take the supplies with them? You're going to destroy them. So the Federals set the church on fire. Now, this is where history has sort of an interesting intersection. I always thought the winners wrote history, but it's the people who write a lot that write history. All the Union soldiers thought that the church had burned down and the supplies were destroyed. There's a real good biography of William McKinley's Civil War years that he wrote, and that was written, now not him, but was written in 2002, and it talks about, and as they left town, they burned the church down. Well, what they didn't know was the good ladies of the town of Pearisburg formed a bucket brigade and saved the church. And it burned down about 3 years later, but it was saved and the supplies were saved. So we've got this running gun battle going through the town and on down the south side of the river. Remember, there are no bridges on the new river. Okay, so it had all been south and had gone through what's now the main part of town. And Hayes is going to where he wants to get, and that's to the Narrows. That's where he really wants his defensive position to be. So they're retreating through town and they come to the Narrows. Okay, now we'll go to the next one. This gentleman is George S. Patton, Colonel George S. Patton. To me, he looks a little bit nicer, not as mean as his grandson. But anyway, Patton is one of the Confederate colonels leading a charge, and he's shot in the stomach. During the Civil War, they called that being gut shot. And if you were gut shot, you just hoped you had enough time to write a final letter home and say a few prayers because you were gone. So that was literally what Patton was doing. He's under a tree, and he's writing his final letter to his wife. Because he's already sent the doctor away. He says, no use to treat me. Everybody knows if you got shot, you're going to die. Okay? And who comes riding up? Harry Heath. And he says, what's wrong? And he says, I've been shot in the gut and I'm dying. And he says, well, you don't look like you're dying to me. So he comes over and he says, let me look at this wound. And there's this bloody mass on his stomach. And Heath, remember this guy's been out in a battle for however long, sticks his fingers in the wound, and pulls out a gold piece. And it turns out that the bullet, that Patton had a gold piece in his vest pocket, and the bullet had bounced off that gold piece. Now he was hurt, obviously. The impact would be enough to really hurt you, but his organs, his internal organs, had not been sliced or cut, anything like that. Now, another thing, surprise, surprise, he did have an infection after that. Nobody can figure out where that came from. But anyway, be that as it may, Patton lived to fight another day. And it broke my heart when I talked to one of his great-great-grandsons and found out that gold piece had been in the family for years and years, and a few years ago it was stolen by somebody. But anyway, what a great thing to have had in the museum, But anyway, that's how Patton is saved. Well, the whole battle is stalemated. Hayes is where he is. You remember about the Spartans at Thermopylae. All right. In that narrow area, his line, the Confederates can't put up a line any longer than his line. It doesn't matter how many soldiers you have. They can't make anything any longer than what Hayes can do with his 600 men. So the battle comes to pretty much of a stalemate. General Heath would talk about this being some of the hardest fighting of the entire battle, but it's all stalemated. So what do the Confederates do? If Hayes, having studied Greek and Latin in college, knew about Thermopylae, the VMI and the West Pointers knew about the use of artillery by Napoleon. They get artillery across the river on the other side and start banging into Hayes from the side. He's being flanked. Now, my question, when I was looking at this, first of all, I said, how in the world did they get a cannon across the New River? There had been a very rainy April. The river would have been almost at flood stage at that time. And the nearest ferry, Hobbs's Ferry, was behind the Union line. Well, this is how I found one source. It was a Cleveland newspaper, and they said they used boats. Well, here's the boat that they used. This is the thing that moved freight through the New River before the railroads. This is what's called a bateau. It's about 60 feet long. It's about 10 feet wide. There's still evidence on the river at different places of sluices that they would make to carry, to let the bateaus, form thicker water so they could get through. It only went into the water about a foot, so that's how you could take this large boat and carry it across the shallow river. If you want to go to the next one. This area may look familiar to you. It used to be called the Great Falls. It's now McCoy Falls. If you went to Tech, you probably partied here, and you're lucky you didn't drown. Okay, but anyway, this is right as you come into Giles County, and right there, it's not as good a picture as that one. There's a bateau. See how they have rudders on both ends that's used to steer the boats better. But anyway, that has to be the boats he was talking about. That's the only thing that could have carried a cannon to the other side. So Hayes, he's in an untenable position. All of a sudden, he's getting shot at the side by artillery. The muskets wouldn't have had as long a range, but the artillery, so he really can't do anything about it, but the artillery hasn't had a much longer range. So what they do is he retreats again, and he retreats to a place called Adair's. Okay, so here's what we have. They leave Pearisburg. They're always on the south side of the river. There's no bridges. And they have the big fight here at the Narrows. See the two mountains coming in. Hayes retreats to Adair's. Now, sitting in Adair's is Ellen Adair. She's 17 years old. She writes a diary that's recently been preserved at Hollins College. She was at what was then called Hollins Institute. And somebody, when they did this newspaper article, asked me, how would you describe Ellen Adair? And I said she was the Scarlett O'Hara of Giles County. But anyway, she's writing, there's Yankees in the front yard and they're eating like wolves, The whole Union Army ends up in this girl's yard. This is a very fine home, this Adair home, okay? And, she's talking about that. And I can't go into all about her diary, but if you read her diary, I would say one thing about her is she was looking for a husband. She was looking for a man. As a matter of fact, when the Federals were chased out and the Confederates came through, one of her cousins was with the Confederates, and he saw her, and he knew that that she'd been part of the occupied territory for almost a week, and he goes up to her and says, "Mary Ellen, you didn't fall in love with any Yankee officers, did you?" But anyway, General Heath stops right there. Okay, he stops at the Narrows, and he sets up camp, aptly named Camp Success. I think there's a campground by that name down there. Yeah, okay. Anyway, he sets up there. What he's done is, it's around 2 in the afternoon. He's marched his men since 10 of the night before, all night. They're exhausted. He's captured the town. He's retaken the town. He's retaken the supplies, and most importantly, he's retaken the Narrows. So he stops right there. Well, it was a good thing for him that he stopped right there, because guess who comes trotting into the battle now? Colonel Scammon. He is finally given permission to reinforce Hayes. It's too late, but he meets with Hayes at Adair's with artillery, and the two armies are kind of evened up in size now. The next day they moved to Glen Lynn, or what's now Glen Lynn, because it was a better area. One of the Federal soldiers said, this area is so stony, if we have to, we can stone them to death. But anyway, he moves to Glen Lynn. They stay there until the 17th of May. It's a rough stay because they're out of food. They don't have the church and all those supplies anymore, and they've been sort of just cut off from any other supplies from what's now West Virginia. So anyway, they stay there for about a week, and then if you want to go to the next one, and if you look here, there is a separate campaign going on. General Humphrey Marshall's coming up through Tazewell towards Princeton. And when he hits Princeton, the Federals all have to abandon and retire back up to Flat Top Mountain. It just, by this time, that's where everything is. And Hayes, who is very perceptive about military things, said, the boundary between Flat Top Mountain is the boundary between the conquered part of Virginia and the unconquered part of Virginia. And the whole strategy after that time changes. It's no longer Union troops taking territory. It's they're hanging out there and they're conducting raids. And they're about, I forget how many raids, but the whole history after that of the war in Southwest Virginia is different Union raids to destroy the salt works, destroy the railroad. The biggest one being General Crook, who came through in 64 and attacked Radford and burned down the Central Depot and burned the bridge and what have you. Well, every historian, it seems, that writes about anything says that whatever they're writing about is the most important thing in the history of the universe. Well, I'm not going to do that about the Battle of Pearisburg. But it did have some real important aspects. Very important aspect, and probably the most important aspect, is it saved the railroad and the railroad bridge. Okay, in the next 5 months, there will be as much fighting in Virginia as there is in any 5 months of the Civil War. You had Jackson's Valley Campaign, the 7-day battles, Cedar Mountain, Second Manassas, and it ends at Antietam. And there's no way that the Confederates could have done what they did during that time period if this railroad had been cut off. Now for Hayes, I think it was a very defining moment for him. He's in a tight spot. Don't talk to me about the Confederates and all the men they had and all the artillery. Talk about Hayes. His men could have all been captured real easily, but he is able to maneuver them out, get them out of trouble. He, all his men, everyone who ever wrote about it, said what a great person, what a great leader he was, and what have you, getting them out of this real predicament. And finally, for the people of Giles County, it very well could have determined whether or not they were going to be part of the state of West Virginia. This boundary between Virginia and West Virginia is not some black line written in stone someplace. Of the Confederates that fought at Pearisburg, probably half of them were from counties that would become part of West Virginia. So, it's not all Union on one side and all Confederate on the other. Giles was considered several times to become part of West Virginia. There was even talk one time of making everything west of the Blue Ridge part of West Virginia. But Giles was considered. Now, one of the members of General Heth's staff, who was very perceptive, wrote, if they had had the time to fortify the Narrows, we could have never gotten them out of there. And a lot of what determined the southern boundary was where the soldiers were. And if Giles County had been an occupied county, it may well have gone into West Virginia at that time. But that didn't happen, and all that speculation. What happened was the Confederates won the battle. The railroad was saved. Giles County is not part of West Virginia, and a future president was able to get out, retreat, and get the most remarkable regiment of the Civil War up to fight another day. So thank you.